Civil War Commander is the third game that I played and the last game that I will play in the 10-minute war games series. I found the idea of a 10-minute war game promising at the beginning. I would have liked to be able to play 10-minute fillers with a war theme and maybe even a little bit of a war game feel to them. But the previous games that I played in the series were not too exciting, and this one unfortunately also I did not find too appealing, but maybe you will find it appealing, so I'm going to tell you a bit about it. The game is a 2-player card game. Clearly the topic is a civil war. It comes in this small transparent box, and this card here is the cover pretty much. The game includes a rule sheet, very small, very short, and then this is pretty much it. This is it. And then you have 4 decks of cards. Terrain cards, initiative cards that are used to modify attacks, and then units for the Union player and for the Confederate player. At the beginning of the game, the players draw 5 terrain cards and place them face up in a row in the middle of the table. Each card represents a specific type of terrain, and it shows a set of modifiers for the attacker and a set of modifiers for the defender. A player will be the attacker and a player will be the defender, so you need to put the cards so that all the defense modifiers face one player and all the attack modifiers face the other player. Then the defender, suppose the Union is defending, the defender draws 15 cards and plays 10 cards face down, 2 per terrain card. Cards include cavalry, or infantry, and artillery. Do we have artillery here? Where's artillery? And artillery. All units have 2 values, attack and defense, and very often the defense is better than the attack, but not always. So the player, the defender, places 2 cards face down by each terrain card. Now the terrains give modifiers to the effectiveness of each type of unit. For example, here infantry gains +2, but cavalry -1, artillery -1. So now I did it randomly. Most likely we'll want to place infantry here and try not to place artillery there. After the defender did this, the attacker draws 20 cards and places 3 face down in front of each terrain card, so that also the attacker will be left with 5 cards in his reserve. So now the defender prepared his line of defense, the attacker prepared his attack, and then the attacker draws 5 cards from this deck and places them face down, one of each on each of his attack groups. These cards represent how the commander of that section of the army will behave when the attack actually starts. All this part feels like setup, and it pretty much is, but actually this is supposed to be part of the game. This is supposed to be part of the fun. I didn't find it very exciting because I just found that the choices that you make here, once you see what you have in your hand, are pretty obvious. You may bluff, but there isn't much of an advantage in bluffing by placing ineffective units in an area where those units are not going to be very useful just for the sake of it, just to trick the opponent. Usually you just want to maximize the bonuses that you can receive from the terrain cards, and you want to minimize the penalties. Once this is done, then the attacker chooses the order in which the areas are resolved. You will have to resolve all areas, and to resolve an area, quite simply, the players reveal the cards that they have. They take into account the modifiers from terrain, and they total the amount of points that they have in that area. That amount of points may also be modified by the initiative card. For example, well, in this case, you would need to total all of the attack factors and modify each, total all the defense factor and modify each of them, and see who has the highest result. That player remains, or becomes the defender. In case of a tie, the original defender is the winner. If the attacker has a total highest amount of points, then the attacker becomes the defender, and you indicate that by turning the card. Now the defense side is facing this side here. Some of those card will give modifiers. I cannot find. There we go. I was trying to look for something, for a modifier that would, help me say what I'm trying to say. For example, in this column here, if we have this initiative card, then the commander not fully committed to the attack, attacking totals are halved in this sector, this phase. So after you compute the total result, then you apply this modifier here. But there are some of these cards with very powerful effects. For example, in this case, you total everything, but then in any case, it doesn't really matter, because the effect of this card is that the defensive commander panics and withdraws from his position. The attackers take the terrain. This is it. So it doesn't really matter what cards you had. The attacker here wins and becomes the defender. So some of these cards are very powerful. Also, if you take a terrain, then you have a +2 as the attacker when you're trying to take an adjacent terrain in that phase. So you resolve all 5 areas, and at the end of that, in some areas the original defender will still be the defender, in some other areas maybe the original defender will become the attacker. Then you start the second and, luckily enough, last round of combat, in which each player commits 2 cards from their reserve. Remember, each player has a reserve of 5 cards. Each player places those 2 cards, and those are placed face down to reinforce defensive areas in which the player is the defender, and to reinforce reinforce areas in which the player is the attacker. For example, in this case here, that player is the attacker, and here that player is the attacker, and these are the areas here this player is still the attacker. In the areas where he plays the attacker, that player receives an initiative card. That means that it is always the attacker that will have to place an initiative card and see what the modifiers are. So in the second round of combat, some initiative cards may go on one side and some initiative cards may go on the other side. The players reveal the cards that they have added between the first and the second round. The players reveal these cards. Again, they total out of the results. They take into account the modifiers. At the end of that, you see which player is in control of the majority of areas on the board. That is, which player is the defender in most areas, and that player is the winner, and the other player is the loser. That's simple. So this is how the game works, and I don't know, maybe you already saw something in here that I didn't, but after playing the game, I have 2 main problems with this game. The first is that the choices that you have seem pretty obvious and straightforward. You want to make your bonuses strong, your units strong, and you want not to be penalized by terrain penalties, so you will just place your cards in such a way that you get better results, better numbers. Again, you can try to bluff in this phase during the first round, but the advantage of having high numbers definitely outweighs any advantage you may have from bluffing at that point. The only choice that really seems relevant strategically is where you commit your reserves between round 1 and round 2, because there you have to figure out where the opponent is going to place cards, where the opponent is going to reinforce. You are going to reinforce more in that area or ignore that area and reinforce somewhere else. That's a decision that you have to make, but it is still a minor one. It is a matter of placing 2 cards. And even after you have taken these decisions, some obvious, some less obvious, luck has such a huge factor. Not so much in the cards that you receive at the beginning of the game, you just receive many, and more or less you find cards to do something on the board. But the real problem that I have is with these cards here, with the Commander Initiative, because they are so powerful. In many cases, the effect of the initiative cards overwhelms pretty much everything else that you have done. Look at this, no matter how well you played, if this is the card that was added to that position, then the defender loses and the attacker wins. Here, the contrary is true. The units do not attack of the units of the attacker, and so the defender remains the winner here. Attacking totals are halved in this sector. This is huge. If you receive this, it is going to be very hard for you to win the fight in that battle, in that sector. And again, that makes it feel like the previous choices that you made, after all, were not nearly as important in the end to influence the outcome of the game as these cards are important. So this is pretty much why the game is not one that I enjoyed very much. It feels that it's based on not tough, not so exciting choices, and overall choices that do not feel meaningful because the commando initiative cards are pretty much, again, really at the core of the game. They really seem to be the single element of the game that determines who wins and who loses the game. So, well, again, I had somewhat some hopes in Civil War Commando. I would have liked to be able to play a 10-minute war game with a Civil War theme, but alas, that was not meant to be. And at the end, after playing several games in this series, I will have to resign to the idea that war games probably were never meant to be played in 10 minutes. And at the end, after playing several games in this series, I will have to submit. And at the end, after playing several games in this series, I will have to resign myself to the idea that war games were never meant to be played in 10 minutes.